The white liberal is the worst enemy to America and the worst enemy to the black man. Let me explain what I mean by the white liberal. In America, there is no such thing as a Democrat or Republican anymore. In America, you have liberals and conservatives. The only people living in the past who think in terms of I'm a Democrat or a Republican is the American Negro. He's the one that runs around bragging about party affiliation. He's the one that sticks to the Democrats or sticks to the Republicans. But white people are divided into two groups, liberals and conservatives. The Democrats who are conservative vote with the Republicans who are conservative. The Democrats who are liberal vote with the Republicans that are liberal. The white liberal aren't white people who are for independence, who are moral and ethical in their thinking. They are just a faction of white people that are jockeying for power. The same as the white conservative is a faction of white people that are jockeying for power. They are fighting each other for power and prestige. And the one that is in the game is the Negro, 20 million black people, a political football, a political pawn, an economic football, an economic pawn. A social football, a social pawn. The liberal elements of the whites are those who have perfected the art of selling themselves to the Negro as a friend of the Negro, getting sympathy of the Negro, getting the alliance of the Negro, and getting the mind of the Negro. Then the Negro signs with the white liberal, and the white liberal uses the Negro against the white conservative, so that anything that the Negro does is never for his own good, never for his own advancement, never for his own progress. He's only a pawn in the hands of the white liberal. The worst enemy that the Negro have is the white man that runs around here drooling at the mouth, professing to love Negroes and calling himself a liberal. And it is following these white liberals that has perpetuated problems that Negroes have. If the Negro wasn't tricked or deceived by the white liberals, the Negroes would would get together and solve our own problems. I only cite these things to show you that in America, the history of white liberal has been nothing but a series of trickery designed to make Negroes think that the white liberal was going to solve our problems. Our problems will never be solved by the white man. The only way that our problem will be solved is when the black man wakes up, cleans himself up, stands on his own feet, and stops begging the white man and take immediate steps to do so, or to do for ourselves the things that have been waiting on the white man and for us to do. Once we do for ourselves, then we will be able to solve our own problems. The white conservatives aren't friends of the Negro either, but they are at least, don't try to hide it. They are like wolves. They show their teeth and snarl at that keeps the Negro aware of where he stands with them. But the white liberals are foxes who also show their teeth to the Negro, but pretend they are smiling. The white liberals are more dangerous than the conservatives. They lure the Negro, and as the Negro runs from the growling wolf, he flees into the open jaws of the smiling fox. One is the wolf, the other is the fox. No matter what, they'll both eat you. That was Malcolm X. And this, my friends, is AllMinucOne. I'm Bill. Welcome. Please, if you enjoy my content, like, share, and subscribe. So, guys, sorry for a little bit of a delay on this. This has been a thing that I've been trying to get out and just hadn't been able to fully do. Did part 1 the other day, and this is going to be part 2 of a little bit of history of the Democratic Party, Democratic control. Now, what I went over the other day was just how the Democrats in general have controlled the federal government for the last 100 years. It isn't until very recently, essentially under Bill Clinton, and a little bit later on with Bush and Obama, that Republicans actually had some control. The problem is that the modern Republican Party largely has been liberal. They've been neocons, and neocons and neolibs run the government. When people point to Republicans being racist, it is wholeheartedly unfounded. But there are people who are corporatist and they don't care and they're elitist that are within the Republican Party. Those are the neocons. Those are people, say, presidents like George W. Bush or Herbert Walker Bush. And way back when, I would say even Richard Nixon. These are people that are about political control, political power. They're globalists. They don't care about the little man. They don't care about you or me. And they certainly don't care about the black folk who are struggling. Now, I quoted to you from Malcolm X because he pointed this out way back in the 50s and 60s. And of course, he paid for his outreach with his life. Now, he was a polarizing character to many, but generally speaking, I'm going to let him speak in his own words here today to some degree and let you see his perspective. And he essentially thought that that black people needed to take responsibility for themselves, that white people didn't owe them anything. That was the bigger thing. And he talked often about white guilt. And folks, I'm not a fan of the idea of white guilt. I think it is a pernicious and evil idea. An evil idea used to manipulate your emotions so that you will do things to give others power. And this isn't black folk. They're just being used as pawns by the political class. But this is just any person who is saying these words. And Malcolm X actually brings these points up, so I'm going to cover that here in a second. What you also need to understand is what's going on here in the United States politically right now is a giant shift. This is why you have former Republicans who are neocons saying that they're never Trumpers and they're backing up Joe Biden. Joe Biden, who is completely incompetent and apparent and open racist, essentially. He doesn't say he's racist, but he says a lot of really, really bad stuff. Unlike Donald Trump, who has been labeled a racist, but has never said anything directly that I know of that would speak to that, nor has his history within the black community or with black folks or many other people over the years expressed any sort of view like that. Donald Trump is a businessman, but he's also kind of a blue-collar guy for a business. He's like a rich kind of blue-collar guy. And he's not part of the elite. He never has been. Even when he was coming up in New York, he was always being fought against because the elite, they like to keep their little social club nice and snobby. They like to keep people out. They don't want you in, folks, unless you play their game and you play their politics. That's why you see Hollywood and the politics that Hollywood has. Or let's say most of the mainstream media. But let's hear a few minutes of Malcolm X's words on the liberals.
There are many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling and you take him for a friend.
There are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly. And therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro.
On the other hand, I think one could point to a large number of whites who have struggled for civil rights, for equality, and have got little or nothing out of it, other than quite a few bruises.
Give me an example.
Well, the large number of white students who have gone into the South, for example, working for SNCC and other organizations.
Not working for SNCC or other organizations, but working for the white political machines who benefit by the voting efforts of Negroes.
Okay. today you could point to a large number of Negro leaders who have consistently betrayed Negroes in a whole host of areas.
They aren't really Negro leaders. These are puppets that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. These are...
Now, that specifically is someone like Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton. Very specifically. They are truly grifters. They aren't real leaders in any community. They haven't done anything. If they do something, if something actually happens within society that changes, then they are out of a job. Remember that. Think about that. They've been doing this. Jesse Jackson goes all the way back to this era. They've been doing this for a long time. They are not on the side. They are rich men. They are not on the side of the average black person. I also want to point out that a lot of black people are doing really, really well in the United States. It's only a select few in certain cities and ghettos that are doing bad. And the more that people come away from that liberal ideology, and I use liberal in the colloquial sense as in a progressive. Some liberals are more progressive than others, but they're not a full-on progressive. But what that really means is a liberal is they're liberal with the Constitution, they're liberal with the laws, they're liberal with this, they're liberal with that. When I talk about being a classical liberal, that actually makes me a conservative, because classical liberalism is about individual rights. And that's a whole nother kind of issue. But this, there's many, many shades of gray to political philosophy. Mine is every single human being is precious, and every single human being should be treated with dignity. And we all have certain God-given rights instilled to us, like the preservation of our own life, the ability to go out and make our way in life, and the ability to be free as long as we don't go out and hurt other people. That's just essentially the core of my philosophy. But I'm no ideologue or a partisan. I might think that the Republicans do a little bit better job often, but I also criticize them quite a bit. And that should be noted. But again, what Malcolm X is talking about, he's talking about fake, false leaders that are propped up by people on the left.
Are parrots that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. You can't name me a Negro leader who has betrayed Negroes, who has not been endorsed, sanctioned, subsidized, and supported by the white liberals.
So, getting into the history, that brings me to this. And this is a list of Klan members in the United States politics. And we have a bunch of names here. Now, these are just random names, so let's go through. Robert Byrd. This is the former senator in my area. I didn't live here at the time, but he was an exalted Cyclops of his local chapter. He was recruited while in his 20s, raising to the title of Exalted Cyclops. After leaving the group, Byrd spoke in favor of the Klan during his early political career. Byrd wrote a letter in 1946 to the group's Imperial Wizard, stating the Klan is needed today as never before, and I am anxious to see its rebirth here in West Virginia. However, when running for United States House of Representatives in 1952, he announced, after about a year, I became disinterested, quit paying my dues, and dropped my membership in the organization. During the 9 years that have followed, I have never been interested in the Klan. Okay, but why were you part of the Klan? Did you change your beliefs? How much announcement was there in the Klan? It says Byrd later called joining the Klan the greatest mistake of his life. Yeah, because it affected his political career to some degree. And it says he attempted to explain and defend his former membership in the Klan in 1958 U.S. Senate campaign. When he was 41 years old, Byrd, a Democrat, eventually became a party leader in the Senate. Byrd later said joining the Klan was the greatest mistake after his death, and NAACP released a statement praising Byrd. That is just absolutely ridiculous. That's the National Association of Colored People, folks, of the Advancement of Colored People, sorry. The National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. That Why are they praising him? Well, because of liberal politics, because the NAACP doesn't mean anything, you know? It says in a 2001 interview, Byrd used the term white N-words. You can read that for yourself or infer twice during a national television broadcast. The full quote ran as following: "My old mom told me, Robert, you can't go to heaven if you hate anybody." We practice that. There are white N-words. We've seen a lot of white N-words in my time. I'm going to use that word. We just need to work together to make our country a better country. And I just as soon quit talking about it so much. And then he later apologized for it. So that's Robert Byrd, someone who, look, Bill Clinton was at his funeral, said he was a good old boy. He just had to join the Klan back in the day to get ahead. I doubt it. Another one was obviously Joe Biden, now running for president and currently under a lot of scrutiny as his son has seemed to have been laundering money toward him from foreign nations. Now, that's not proven, but that's the allegations based on emails and other documentation, and Twitter and Facebook are censoring such things. So that's a whole nother video. Maybe I'll do some stuff on that tomorrow if I get a chance, since it is quite relevant to today. So here is Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black. Folks, a Democrat successfully defended E.R. Stephenson in his trial for the murder of a Catholic priest. That was another thing, is the Klan, most people aren't aware, were very much against Catholics, and Catholics in certain areas. They were another group that were discriminated against. See, we think of the Klan today as just against black people. Even lynching. The activist won't tell you the truth about lynching. Yeah, there were several thousand lynchings. I should have brought that up, actually. I could Google it real quick, but you guys can do that for yourself. The reality is there were several thousand lynchings of black people, but there were about twice or three times as many of white people. It happened quite often, folks. It wasn't exclusive to black folks. It had a lot to do with people just wanting to really keep their culture exactly the way they wanted it, and they would keep it that way or else. Now, this would be the right-wing traditionalism being called fascism as that, but that's not what this was at all, because, again, you'll see all this was on the left. All this was by Democrats. Also, understand this. People on the right aren't afraid of progress. They're just cautious of how progress goes, of where we go. People on the right who are say, traditional style conservatives aren't necessarily religious. Many of them are, people like me. But I don't push my religion on people because I don't believe that. I don't think that that's what the early Christians did. They talked about the religion to people. They would preach to people, and they would hope people would come, and they would have conversations. But they weren't doing what the modern church does. There was a period of time from the 70s through the early 90s where there was a religious right in the United States, that the conservatives were led by evangelicals, and they still are a major voting bloc. That's where the South, or why the South, part of that, and jobs, or why the South started turning Republican, because of the industrialization of the South, the right to work in the South, the fleeing of labor unions. That's what happened, folks. Most of the South had already decent race relations with people in the South who were of minority groups, black, whatever. That was already a thing in the United States. Now, you might say there might be some backwoods areas where there were lynchings or this and that. Sure. But folks, again, that was the democratically ruled South. That was never the Republican Party South. It's a much different thing, a much different ideology. And it's not even fully even an ideology, because the right is not a monolith. I don't think the left is either, but the left tends to collectivize more because their basic premise is always on collectivization, protectionism, and essentially might makes right. It's why they don't care about the Constitution. It's why they're also always revolutionaries. So we can look at the case of the kidnappers of Michigan, the plot to overthrow Whitmer. Well, those people were anarchists and they believed in the Constitution, but they were revolutionaries. So I would say that actually makes them laugh. Now, I made some videos on that, and I said, well, sure, they're right in the fact that they're constitutionalists. But people on the right, the idea, the very word itself of being conservative is conserving the government that we have, conserving the Constitution which we ignore constantly. And I think most people accept that. And again, if you go to the right, you'll see a whole slew of different kinds of people, and you'll see people with open arms accepting people who are disaffected liberals. There's a ton of that. If you aren't aware of this, go watch someone like Dave Rubin, who talks about it all the time, or go watch Tim Pool, who talks about that quite a bit, or go watch any number of people. Jack Murphy's a good example, who was a Democrat, he was a liberal, and he became a Republican. Though I'm not saying that you should become a Republican. I think everyone should be an independent, frankly. I think you should strip the power from these parties because, much like Malcolm X was saying, they're just vying for power. But the greater point of all this is that the parties operate differently. The Republicans are rarely unified. The Democrats will be unified. There's a lot more opposition within the Democrats now. Now they're trying to use, like they used blacks, they've tried to use LGBT people, and they are now trying to use the radical leftists, the socialists, and the communists. And a lot of the socialists and the communists see right through it, but they'll still use them. This is why they won't disavow Antifa directly. This is why Joe Biden said he is the Democratic Party, and he won't acknowledge that Antifa is a true issue. All right. So, anyways, there's a list of all of these people. We can go through them all, but really what I want more than anything is to show you just this list of who these people are. Theodore G. Bilbo, Democrat, governor of Mississippi. That ended in 1947, or ended in 1947. Stated that he was a U.S. Senator from Mississippi, later on, I guess, said he was a member of the KKK. John Brown Gordon, a Democrat, U.S. Senator for Georgia, allegedly a founder of the KKK in the home state of Georgia. Joseph E. Brown, 1821 to 1894, a Democrat, U.S. Senator for Georgia, key supporter of the KKK. Elmer Davis, 1899 to 1957, Democrat and federal judge in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, was a member of the KKK while at university. And again, folks, I believe in redemption. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying you're not going to see a lot of people who are Republicans. Edward Jackson became governor of Indiana as a Republican, and in 1925, and his administration came under fire for granting undue favor to the Klan's agenda and association. Jackson was further damaged by the arrest and trial of the Grand Dragon for the rape and murder of Magdi Oberholtz, when it was revealed that Jackson had attempted to bribe the former governor to appoint a Klansman to local office. Jackson was taken to court. His case ended with a hung jury, and Jackson ended his political career in disgrace. So Clarence Morley, it says, a Republican and governor of Colorado, was a KKK member and strong supporter of Prohibition. He tried to ban the Catholic Church from using sacramental wine and attempted to have a University of Colorado fire at Jewish Catholic professors. Again, they were very anti-Catholic. Bibb Graves, a Democrat who was governor of Alabama. Clifford Walker, Democrat, governor of Georgia, was a secret Klan member who consulted with Klan leaders while governor. George Gordon, a Democrat and congressman for Tennessee, 10th Congressional District, became one of the Klan's first members. In 1867, Gordon became the Klan's first Grand Dragon for the realm of Tennessee. John Taylor Morgan, a Democrat and U.S. Senator for Alabama, was a Grand Dragon of the KKK. Are you starting to see a pattern? There was 2 Republicans. I was mistaken because I thought there weren't any. But that may have been a different list I was looking at. But yeah, here we have a Democrat and governor of Georgia, George Gordon, Democratic congressman. Yeah, sorry, backed up there a little bit. Edmund Pettus, a Democrat and U.S. Senator for Alabama, was also a Grand Dragon. John M. Morton, a Democrat, Tennessee Secretary of State. And if you look at the dates of all this, folks, you can see why there was voter suppression and everything else. These people were the ones in power. Was a founder of the Nashville chapter of the KKK. William L. Saunders, a Democrat, was the North Carolina Secretary of State and was founder of the North Carolina chapter. John Clayton Porter, a Democrat, was a member of the Klan in the early 1920s and served as mayor of Los Angeles. Los Angeles, folks. It's California, liberal California. Or I should say regressive California. Benjamin F. Stapleton, a Democrat, was mayor of Denver from 1920 to 1940s. He was a Klan member in the early 20s and appointed fellow Klansmen to positions of municipal government. Ultimately, Stapleton broke from the Klan and removed several Klansmen from office. Now, this happens. This happened when I used to work for the local sheriff's department. There were people that would get special jobs because they were Freemasons. By the way, folks, Freemasonry basically birthed the Klan. Now, they're separate groups, but originally in Freemasons, in the original lodges of Freemasonry, there were no black men. They weren't admitted, and women. So they had to come up with co-masonry and other types of lodges, other types of groups. So then we have David Duke. It says, a politician who ran for both Democratic and Republican presidential primaries. Okay, but he was mostly a Democrat. You can look up David Duke's record. He was a founder and Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in the mid-70s. He retitled his position as national director and said the KKK needed to get out of the cow pasture and into the hotel meetings. He left the organization in 1980. He ran for president in 1988 Democratic presidential primaries. That was old Herbert Walker's day. And Duke switched political parties from Democrat to Republican, and he didn't really do well with that either. He became a member of the Louisiana State Legislature from the 81st District and was a Republican Party chairman for the St. Tammany Parish. So, alleged members, Warren G. Hardie, a Republican, but this was unfounded. Says in 1921 Republican Party platform, which essentially expressed Harding's political philosophy, called the Congress to pass laws combating lynching. Harding denounced lynching in a landmark 21st October 1921 speech in Birmingham, Alabama, which was covered in the national press. Harding was vigorously supported an anti-lynching bill in Congress during his term in the White House. His commitments about race and equality were remarkable for 1921. Let me remind you as well that there was a stock market crash of that year, and he did nothing. And there was a recovery the very next year, unlike a few years later under Hoover, who was more of a progressive, even though he was a Republican. And Hoover basically implemented all these programs, and the Great Depression started, and FDR carried it forward. Oh. Excuse me, folks. Payne argues the Klan was so angry at Harding's attack on the Klan that it originated and speared a false rumor that he was a member. Now, I should also remind you, although Woodrow Wilson was not a member of the Klan, he did play the first movie ever in the White House, and that was A Birth of a Nation, a movie about the Ku Klux Klan. Woodrow Wilson being one of the first and biggest progressive presidents, at least following FDR. Or not FDR, sorry, Teddy Roosevelt, that is. And then here, Harry S. Truman, a Democratic politician who became president in 1945, was accused by opponents of having dabbled with the Klan briefly. In 1924, he was a judge in Jackson County, Missouri. Now, Truman followed FDR, right? If you recall this, he's also the one that got us into the Korean War. Truman was up for re-election, and his friend Edgar Hind and Spencer Salisbury advised him to join the Klan. The Klan was politically powerful in Jackson County, and two of Truman's opponents in the Democratic Party had Klan support. Truman refused at first, but paid the Klan's $10 membership fee, and a meeting with the Klan officers was arranged. So there was that. And then Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ as we know him, who created the Great Society. It says Ned Touchstone claimed that Klan had proof of Johnson having been a member early in Johnson's political career, according to the note and documents relating to the JFK assassination that were declassified in 2017. Quite interesting. LBJ was reported to say that, reported, because this was hearsay, so you cannot corroborate, but reportedly said, I will have these N-words voting Democrat for the next 100 years, because he started the Great Society. He started the federal welfare program. There was welfare before that, mostly within cities and state government. There was maybe some federal stuff that I'm not fully aware of, but generally speaking, there was not a giant federal welfare program. Now, a lot of people on the left will praise the Great Society as being this great thing, except for if you look at the charts, you'll see that essentially over the years, you'll see the decline, the complete fall of poverty within the United States. And there's a sharp looking fall during the Great Society, or right afterwards, but that decline was going on for a very, very long time. And then it's been stagnant ever since, more or less. So it absolutely did nothing. It did nothing for people other than create dependency. And then it helped destroy the black family and many families of, other ethnic groups. There is a large portion of whites today, I think 40%, that live in fatherless homes. This is horrible for society, folks. You need fathers. Fathers are more important than we believe. Fathers and mothers are very important for the health of children. Mothers alone can do the job. However, statistically speaking, those who have the most problems and troubles in life, including something like 80 or 90% of all prisoners, grew up in single mother homes. Fathers provide a role. And it is the progressives, or the regressives, I should say, the liberals, the leftists who want to destroy that. The communists who want to destroy the families, such as BLM on their front page. I think, by the way, I haven't checked because I don't go on their page because I don't want their page to have traffic. But from what I understand, they took that part down. I might be mistaken about that. But they specifically said they want to destroy the American nuclear family. That is the foundation building blocks of all families. Now, I did a video a while ago, and when I first started this little YouTube project of mine, that covered the Republic of Plato. And really it was Socrates' Republic, or Plato at least used Socrates as the one who proposed it. But the whole idea was a technocracy. It was an elitist class that ruled all others, and that it had censorship, extreme censorship, so that people wouldn't get evil ideas and poor ideas, and that children would be taken away from their parents and raised by the state. And so there was an elite class. There was a military / police class. And then at the very bottom, there was the working class, the slaves, essentially, the plebes, if you would. And this is what communism is, folks. This is why I always say that Karl Marx was an idiot, and anyone else who's ever purported to or espoused communism. Anyone who proposes communism is a dreamer fool, and they don't understand the reality of life. You can't just get things out of nowhere. You have to work hard. There's everything in the world is about working to get it. If I want to get fit, if I want to exercise, and I want a six-pack, and I want bigger arms, and I want to be able to do, 20, 30 pull-ups, guess what I have to do? I have to work at it. And you'll see a communist talking about, oh, yeah, they just say they have to work 65 hours a week. And 90% of them think, like literally think that daddy and mommy paid some bill for someone just to get a job or start a business. And it's their sick insanity. I'm actually going to probably start a segment soon about that, because I like perusing through Reddit and reading what the crazies say about stuff. And mind you, they are absolutely crazy, detached from the realities of society, or they're just bitter. And really, I've talked about that a lot. They're just projecting things onto the world. They're bitter. They're persona. They're not developed individuals. And you have to be to believe this kind of stuff. You really have to be. So let's look at labor unions real quick. Now, I'm not going to go through this because we essentially know how labor unions, anyone knows that the labor unions are the unions of, or sorry, the product of the Democratic Party. But if you want, you can look at the history of labor unions here on Wiki. It says right here, usually on the side of the Democratic Party, that is the people, the coalitions. It helped coordinate and support strikes and eventually became a major player in national politics. So right there, it says American labor unions benefited greatly from the New Deal policies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s. The Wagner Act in particular, legal protection, the right of unions to organize, yada, 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 and so forth. So unions are essentially a product of the Democratic Party. Now, I didn't bring it up in this, but also recall that the unions were a front for the American mafia for a very, very, very long time. There was a movie recently, fictitious movie, but a movie nonetheless, talking about the Teamsters, right? Jimmy Hoffa, all that stuff, with Robert De Niro, called The Irishman. And although that movie's fictitious, is based on true realities. The labor unions were one of the main reasons why the mafia ran with impunity. Again, this is all the history of the Democratic Party. We have the Klan, we have the words of Malcolm X, and that the liberals, and now he sees it kind of like I do. There aren't Democrats and liberals. There are conservatives, there aren't Democrats and Republicans. There are conservatives, or constitutionalists, as I like to think of it. And then there are progressives. And that's really the reality. And there can be some gray area in there, of course. Of course, there always is. But that isn't really the core or the crux of the power and the things that have been going on in the United States. The Democratic Party has run things. When people point to the Republican Party, I'm like, you have got to be insane. And what they point to is they point to the last 20 years, maybe 30 years of U.S. history, which is even more insane. No, again, there are corporatist elements within the Republican Party. I get that. But the Democrats have really been the party of corporatism, folks. They're the ones that started the corporate fascism in the United States under FDR, under the New Deal. It wasn't until essentially JFK came along and deregulated some things and cut taxes that America began to prosper again, because we weren't in a good spot, folks. A lot of the regulations were cut during the Second World War so we could up production. But it isn't the fantasy that the left wants to tell you. You have to study economics and history, though, to understand all this. But it absolutely is not the fantasy that the left wants to tell you that the New Deal saved America. No, it slowed America's advancement and recovery. Now, I showed you the other day in part one of this of how earlier on, after Reconstruction, the United States was largely run by Republicans. And when that happened, we had a very laissez-faire free market capitalist system. And that was the most prosperous time in American history. That's why we call the period that culminated in that the Roaring '20s. And it was Democrats such as Woodrow Wilson who implemented the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve Bank, which devaluates your money this day. The same Federal Reserve Bank that caused the stock market crashes every single time because of how they control the interest rates, and they did this in the late 1920s, 1929, the stock market crash that caused the run on the banks and the Great Depression, and then poor monetary policies on top of that afterwards through FDR and his administration. Hoover did some before that, but FDR just ramped it up, is what kept America in the Depression for so long. And we saw a repeat of this to some degree during the Obama administration and the recovery in the United States, which was not good and very slow until Donald Trump came in. And this isn't some fantasy in my mind. I've read I've read the economics on this. I've read the history on this over and over again. And I don't mean some historian telling me what to think. I've read the policies and the stuff that they enacted and did. The reason why we had a housing bubble in the United States is because Republicans and Democrats, rhinos and dinos, neolibs and neocons, they who are corporatists, corporate fascists, decided to get together and say, we're going to give everyone a house free of consequence. Well, you can't do that. You can't put all that, the things on like the FDIC or bailouts and corporations. You can't do that. They need to fail. The market corrects itself and people will become prosperous when that happens. And instead, what you do is you build this system where you get more and more oligarchy, more and more control in the hands of just a few people. And then you get people who are crazy and enraged, who are out on the streets, burning and looting and whatever else they're doing. You get Antifa. You get a communist movement. You get people who are essentially loons like Bernie Sanders, who's never been taken serious, suddenly be taken serious. I mean, we need to get a grip, folks. We need to get a grip. But it literally is primarily the Democrats that are the issue here. So this is from Commentary Magazine, and this is from actually December 1959. So December 1959, Commentary Magazine, Labor Unions and the Negro. The record of discrimination. The removal of the sanction of law from racial segregation has sharply posed the issue of Negroes' status in. This is by Herbert Hill. The removal of sanctions of law from racial segregation has sharply posed the issue of the Negro status in virtually every area in American life, as much as public schools, religious organizations, and business firms. The labor movement is on trial today, for labor's democratic ideals are in serious conflict with a tradition of racial discrimination in the unions that is currently very much alive. To some degree, union discrimination simply reflects the racial and religious prejudices among union members, prejudices that many unionists share with other prejudiced persons. Thus, recently in the North, groups of white workers participated in violence against Negroes at Tomball Park in Chicago and at Levittown, Pennsylvania. And in the South, workers have given considerable support in the white citizens' councils and other groups seeking to perpetuate segregated institutions. Now, Chicago, and I don't know, but probably Pennsylvania at the time, were Democratic hubs, folks. White unionists committing violence against black folk. This is the history of the party. So let's see here. Oh, I guess that's all I can read of that. Sorry. But that's fine. I have more. The American Prospect. Racism in the Labor Movement. This is from February 23rd, 2011. Damon Root writes about racism in the labor movement while arguing that liberals often uncritically laud unions as unalloyed forces for good, while ignoring that there is an ugly side to the strength of unions. I think that's sometimes true, but I don't really think this is a fair criticism. I gotta shrink this down a tad bit so I can read this, folks. It's hard when your screen is this big. All right. So where was I at? It says, rather forthright acknowledgement that big unions have plenty of pathologies of their own, but the history of racism and labor union movement is certainly something worth acknowledging. Arguing unions have been a net good for society as a whole doesn't preclude acknowledging their historical faults. I would say unions have not been a net good for society. They've created all kinds of crime, obviously racial discrimination, and they have priced out people out of jobs. They also encourage people to be lazy. We have this problem in school unions. We have this problem in many, many labor unions, like the auto manufacturers union and various unions that worked in New York under construction, where it got so bad at a point in New York, even though you could just fix a little wire yourself, if there was a wire there and you didn't call the electrician in through the union, you could be in big, big trouble, which means that then people have to sit around and wait for hours for someone to show up. What unions really do, folks, generally speaking, isn't give people better wages. It gives them easier jobs where they actually hardly have to work. Now, I know that's a socialist, communist dream, but that creates a weak and corrupt society. So it says, Root writes, as scholars ranging from the liberal political scientist Ira Katznelson to the libertarian legal historian David Brighteon have now documented organized labor's rise to power typically came at the expense of black workers. This is true. Consider collective bargaining. By the way, this is a similar thing that's going on with immigration. It's at the expense of black workers, but not just black workers, although it affects them greatly, but also white workers. So does minimum wage, folks. By the way, minimum wage, left-wing idea, prices out low-skilled workers. If our money was sound and was not inflated, we would not need minimum wage. Let's fix the root of the problem and not a symptom. It says, consider the collective bargaining and legal arrangement whereby a union selected by a majority of employees receives the monopoly bargain power to exclusively represent all employees. This valuable union tool first became part of the federal law under the Section 7A of the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933. Since blacks were barred from having the vast majority of unions at the time, collective bargaining served as a de facto ban on all black workers in unionized shops. I think this is like saying capitalism hasn't been unalloyed force for good for black people because we were once bought and sold as property. The labor movement, like nearly every other institution in American life, was once marred by terrible racism. Okay, well, that's a little bit different. That's not capitalism or free markets. Obviously, if you're selling people, there is a great moral conundrum there. But anyways, American Prospect, racism and the labor movement. So I've got to skip ahead, guys, because I'm not trying to make this forever long tonight. It says, Red State, from the Red State, unions and racism, an age-old institutional problem, continues unabated. This, my friends, was written in 2011 as well. It's rather ironic that last week union bosses used the anniversary of Reverend Martin Luther King's assassination to try and drum up support for the union cause. You see, even after all these years, racism and discrimination within the walls of the House of Labor is still very real, as noted by unionfacts.com. Let's look at that real quick. Oh, page not found. Okay. Since 2000, there have been over 4,200 complaints filed against unions for racial discrimination with the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. Employment Opportunities Commission. In some cities, it is a bigger problem than in others. However, the one area where union racism seems to rear its ugly head the most often is with the construction trade unions, where African Americans were excluded from work. Now, I want to remind you that most southern states are right to work. You don't have to join the unions. Here it says systemic racism in the building trades have been built into the construction industry, as Harry Alford, president and CEO of the National Black Chambers of Commerce, has noted. Due to the Jim Crow laws from the South, there were many black Southern craftsmen who would travel to perform their skills. Many would go to places like New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, etc., and would outcompete local white contractors who could not perform as well as they did and could not settle for their affordable pricing. It was because of this that construction unions in the North were formed to block out black crews from coming into communities and providing a better service for a cheaper price. Again, like I said, right to work is in the South. The South moved on. Big labor's structural racism is bigger than the problem with police unions. It's an opinion. This is July 6, 2020. Now, this is from NewJersey.com. And this is kind of more left-leaning as far as perspectives go. But it says police unions and their proponents deny systematic racism, defend excessive force, and racialized brutality by their members, and fight against accountability. So all that's garbage, folks, because first off, there are numerous college studies, academic studies by very, very respected professors that essentially state that there aren't really any differences in police use of force between black folk and white folk and whatever else, except for black folk are less likely to get shot by a white cop. However, there is many incidences against black folks where cops try to arrest where there is more force used, specifically because the black folk often, in these cases, resist arrest more often. They fight back. And I've talked about it briefly before. I haven't made a video really about it, but I did talk about it over on TheEnds Justify the Memes, my live show that I think we just talked about it, last week or 2 weeks ago, about the lack of training with police. But again, I'm going to just keep moving because we're at about 50 minutes in. So from the American Thinker, this is again, March 2020. Democrats, the party of big labor, big government, and big business. Excuse me. There's a widespread perception that the Democratic Party is the party of the working class and the Republican Party is the party of big business, even though Republicans on average receive slightly more from corporate employees prior to 2012. The overall difference between both parties from 1990 to 2020 is statistically insignificant. That is correct. The Democrats actually tend to get bigger donors. This is why I didn't vote for Romney, McCain, those folks, because if you look at who was backing them and you looked at who was backing Obama, it was the same companies, the same corporations. In fact, Democratic reliance on big labor gradually shifted toward big business following the involvement of solidly Democratic corporate giants in 2002. And from 2014 to 2020, Democrats consistently surpassed Republicans in corporate donations. It's because they are corporatist folks and globalists. They care about the big buck bottom line. They don't care about you. Based on data compiled by Open Secrets, Soros Management Fund, Fra LLC, Tom Steyer, and Bloomberg LP ranked among the top 10 political contributions that gave over 90% to Democrats. In sharp contrast, the right-leaning Koch industries made the top 10 only in 2014, and nearly all others. Koch ranked well below the top 20. Now, remember, if you're on the left, Koch is compared to Soros. The Koch brothers don't do as nearly that much. And actually, they're libertarians. Now, they are open border, which is why they have essentially joined up with George Soros on some issues. But they have different monetary policies completely. And I know for a fact that the Koch industry, Koch brothers are about leadership and decentralization, because they have a Koch associate program where they teach young entrepreneurs leadership. It says many liberals believe that big government is needed to rein in big business, and that in the absence of federal intervention, corporations will run roughshod over the average American. Many liberals also believe that corporations are the main benefactors of laissez-faire economics and that free market conservatives who want to scale back regulations are somehow in the pocket of big business. No, laissez-faire capitalism helps the little guy, not the big guy. That's called protectionism, folks. That's called corporatism. That's called cronyism. That is not laissez-faire free market economics. That is what, by the way, corporatism, cronyism, protectionism, all that is what the socialists call capitalism. They are wrong. That's not what capitalism is. They're all different things, folks. They're all different things. Now, I always say, it's just a simple little logic puzzle. If the government is giving the corporations all this power and doing whatever, why are you trying to make the government bigger? Why do you think socialism and communism or whatever, giving more power to the government, is actually going to make any difference? It's not. You're a fool. You haven't thought this out. You think that you'll be in power, but you won't because you're afraid to work hard. And these people in these corporations aren't. They literally aren't. They work ridiculous hours. I know folks. I have family, some family that work for big corporations that aren't home ever with their family. Now, a lot of it's dinners and golfing as well, sure. But there's other stuff going on there, folks. There's still paperwork. There's still things that have to be done. There's still numbers to be crunched. There's still legal work. There's still things to sign. It is not what you think it is. In reality, the opposite is true. Big business and big government go hand in hand because government meddling in economics encourages rent seeking by businesses that can afford to pay for lobbyists. Rent seeking is the effect when they essentially go, well, let's put these laws here or there so that we don't have competition from others. And this happens quite a bit. And the lobbyists seek out the government and they say, well, we need special fire doors. We need special regulations. And folks, I'm not anti-regulation. That's a straw man that the left makes. I'm for low regulations, basic, essential regulations. These businesses come in, they say, well, we need a special fire door. Well, how much does that fire door cost? $10,000. And then the small business is mandated by the government to have it, and they can't afford $10,000. So what happens? They have to shut down or they get fined. That's called rent seeking. What we're seeing right now with the COOF is all these small businesses that got shut down because the government violated their First Amendment constitutional rights and their Ninth Amendment constitutional right. And within that, who got the power? Well, all the giant corporations, Walmart, Amazon, name whatever big corporation that stayed open and stocks went up. While people lose the American dream, laissez-faire capitalism, no, not at all. Corporate fascism, absolutely. By the way, very much how Nazi Germany ran. Not quite the same because they did control the raw materials. The government did itself. It says, this crony capitalism grew exponentially as a result of the New Deal regulations that squeezed out competitors during the 1930s. Aha! Look, true history. Establishment politicians and well-connected corporations are beneficiaries of the myth that big government and big business are adversaries because it hides their unholy alliance. This is absolutely true. In all fairness, neither party has had a monopoly on the dispensation of corporate welfare. The TARP funds that propped up financial institutions deemed too big to fail during the Great Recession were released by the Bush administration. That's true. Also, right before he left office. And Bush, in the Orwellian thing that he said, I have to abandon free market principles in order to save the free market. We don't have a free market in America, folks. It doesn't exist. No free market in America. We have a centralized bank. You don't have money in control of your hands, not in the hands of the people. That's not a free market. We have rent seeking. We have corporate oligarchy. We have people going from party to these other platforms. Right now, we have people who were working for the Democratic Party and working for the Biden campaign who are now on Facebook saying, well, you can't post this article that the New York Post came out with about Joe Biden. Like, understand the reality of what is really going on, folks. Understand they hate Trump because Trump isn't a part of this. He doesn't have those kind of allies. I think that's why they don't like him. They don't have any dirt on him. And whatever the dirt they have, like everyone knows, and they don't really care because we're just like, yeah, let me like have my business. Let me have like some money back in out of my pocket, man. Let me be free. Let me get away from all this intersectional nonsense, this culture war. It says, in addition, establishment Republicans are no better than Democrats at stemming the flow of illegal immigration because big business reap the benefits of this cheap labor without incurring any of the social cost. And both parties are playing the game that is the basis for labeling the Democratic Party the party of big business. What policies from Republicans support small business? Free market conservatism benefits small business because the government does not pick the winners and the losers by means of subsidies, tax breaks, and cumbersome regulations. You will not see policies like these coming from Washington in a major way because proposals for shrinking the federal government rarely see the light of day in Congress. And it goes forward. Now, I need you to understand this. Business as usual, and the swamp is business as usual. And this game of parties is just that. Are there people within the parties who are legitimate people who are not about this crap? Yes. But mostly they're fighting over power. This is why we're never supposed to have a federal government of this size and scope and power. Let's get down here to the Trump administration, and I got to move on because it's getting to be that time. The Trump administration has been good for business of all sizes, mainly due to the unprecedented rate of which it scaled back, stifling regulation. This may be why some of the president's highest approval ratings are now coming from smaller businesses. Donald Trump set himself up apart from the ruling class when he latched onto the third rail issue of illegal immigration and called out the corporate darling Jeb Bush, aka Low Energy Jeb, for his lack of grassroots support. This may explain in part why Bain Capital, the firm co-founded by Mitt Romney, switched teams and contributed solidly to Democrats in 2018. And in 2012, Democrats accused Bain Capital of destroying jobs and systematically dismantling the companies it bought off. Times have changed. Guys, go read this article for yourself. But right there, it is pointing to these things. The American Thinker, by the way, is a great resource. This was March 2020, March 17. So this is right before the coup broke out. So obviously things have changed. But the reality is those things have changed mostly because business as usual, rhinos and dinos, neolibs, neocons, Democrats essentially who have been expanding big government, progressives who are actually regressives, and they don't care about you. So, again, who's controlled the government forever? Well, the Democrats have. And they still do, even if they're Republicans in name. Richard Spencer backs Joe Biden, says MAGA alt-right movement is over. This is true. Richard Spencer, the alt-right icon, the father of the alt-right, switched sides, and this was not a joke to discredit Joe Biden. Right here in this debate, this is on the Kill Stream, Saturday Sunset, October 1st, blah, 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 blah. This is Richard Spencer versus Styx Sexenhammer. Styx is a great political commentator. If you don't know who he is on YouTube, check him out. He does several videos a day and talks about what he wants. He's a libertarian, occultist kind of guy. He's, doing his thing, but he's pretty good as an analyst. And he just wipes the floor with Richard Spencer. And Richard Spencer, by the way, folks, even though you could call him a white supremacist or whatever he is, an ethno-nationalist, he's a socialist, folks. There isn't an alt-right. They're just lefties. People on the right in America, just like from the French Revolution, want not of the status quo maintained, but want the government to be what it is supposed to be, a constitutional government. They don't want big government. They want to be left alone. So here, the Daily Signal, America's top 20 cities for crime and what party runs them. So we'll just run through this real quick. Detroit. Well, we know who runs Detroit. So, Democrat. Memphis, Tennessee. Democrat. Birmingham, Alabama. Democrat. Baltimore. Baltimore's been Democratic for, I think, 60 years, man. It's insane. Flint, Democrat. Same thing. St. Louis, Democrat. Danville, Illinois. Nonpartisan election. Probably mostly Democrat, though. So, Saginaw, Michigan. Nonpartisan again. Wilmington, Delaware. Democrat. Oh, that's old Joe Biden's district. Former district, I should say. Camden, New Jersey. Democrat. That's old serious eyes potato head Cory Booker. Plain Bluff, Arkansas. Democrat. Kansas City, Missouri. Democrat. San Bernardino, California. Democrat. And this will show you the chances of being a victim. But you guys go look this up yourself, right? I'm doing this for the sake of time. Alexandria, Louisiana. Democrat. Little Rock, Arkansas. Democrat. Cleveland. Democrat. Milwaukee. Democrat. Stockton, California. Democrat. Monroe. Democrat. Chester, Pennsylvania. Democrat. Look, guys, these are like the top 18, 20 dangerous cities in America. This was June 24th, 2020. Recall when the city of New York was a complete like dystopian nightmare all through the 70s, started in the late 60s actually, but all through the 70s and 80s. And then who came into office? Giuliani? Yeah, he busted up the mafia and cleaned up the city, got rid of the crime. And then they just started voting Democrats in again. So one last thing before I go, I want to cover this. The whole idea of a dog whistle, secret language that's used by the right to message their racism. Well, here's the history and the origins. I just want you to know this. It came from Australia in the mid-1990s. Has nothing to do with American politics, but as the Democrats like to do, they appropriate it because they're great propagandists and they're good at emotional appeals. We talked about Saul Alinsky before. We talked about how he likes to keep it simple. That's part of his rules for radicals. Well, if you keep it simple, much like BLM and Antifa does with their stupid, illogical mantras, then you get people hooked in because they don't need to think. You've done the thinking for them. But anyways, here it says Howard was accused of communicating messages appealing to anxious Australian voters using code words such as un-Australian, mainstream, and illegals. So this had to do with their prime minister and campaigning and taking in refugees and whatever else. How is un-Australian, mainstream, and illegals dog whistles? They're just freaking words. They mean what they mean. So then it talks about Canada, UK, blah, 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 blah. Now here, this is the important thing. This is the whole thing that the Democrats say there was a Southern strategy and a switch. There was a Southern strategy, yes, under Nixon, and it was to build up the South. But it wasn't to get racist to be racist and become racist Republicans. If that were true, that didn't even come to fruition until the 90s when the South finally switched. Now, I don't know if you guys know history, but I sure do. And Nixon was the president during the 1970s, the early 1970s, in fact. So, let's put our little thinking cap on, and let's do a little logic and say it took 30 years to turn the racist South into racist Republicans, or the South became Republicans because before that, they were poor and they needed industry and they got it. So this is all blamed in 1981 on former Republican Party strategist Lee Atwater when given an anonymous interview discussing Nixon's Southern strategy. Now, go and look up stuff for Southern strategy. Right here it says American politics. Southern strategy was a Republican Party electoral strategy to increase political support among white voters in the South by appealing to racism against African Americans as a civil rights movement and dismantling of Jim Crow laws. No evidence for that whatsoever other than a few spoken words. The only person that switched was parties, I believe, was Strom Thurmond and who was a former Dixiecrat. And I covered that in the previous video of the Civil Rights Act. And this is the thing. This is supposedly what Lee Atwater said in an anonymous interview. Supposedly. And again, anonymous because there's no who gave this interview. Excuse me. You start out in 1954 saying N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say that word. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing. Okay, forced busing was an issue by the Democrats, not the Republicans. States' rights and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes. Well, yeah, tax cuts has nothing to do with racism, right? States' rights has nothing to do with racism. States have the right to do what they want to do. Like, that's in the 10th Amendment, folks. 9th Amendment gives the people the right. And all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. Why? Why would they get hurt worse than whites? And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or another. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying, we want to cut this is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than, N-word, N-word. Now, I need to remind you that dog whistle did not come from Lee Atwater. It came from Australia in the 1990s, a decade after Lee Atwater supposedly made these remarks. Now, here are the exclusive Atwater's infamous interview on the Southern Strategy. Impossible, ridiculous, repugnant, New York Times, Oxford University Press. I mean, I don't know, folks. It says Atwater was contrasting this with Ronald Reagan's campaign, which he felt was devoid of any kind of racism, any kind of reference. However, Ann Haney Lopez, an American law professor and author of the 2014 book Dog Whistle Politics, described Reagan as blowing a dog whistle when the candidate told stories about Cadillac driving welfare queens. Guys, that exists. I've seen that. I've talked about it. I used to work in corrections, folks. It happens. And stamping young bucks, trying T-bone steaks with food stamps, blah, 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 blah. They can. You can get lobster. I've seen it. I took in a young lady and her daughter into my home who didn't have anywhere to go, who got food stamps. They get lobster, folks. It's not like I've seen it done personally. I didn't go grocery shopping with her, well, I took her grocery shopping before she had a car a few times, but I'm saying I didn't tell her what to get. She got what she wanted. But that ain't racist, right? This was a white girl I'm talking about. Not the same thing. There's no dog whistling, folks. That's just Democrats making up stuff to throw shades at the Republicans, to cover up their own sins, because it's what they do. It is what they do. All right, I'm going to read you a little last thing here from Manning Johnson's Color, Communism, and Common Sense. It says, creating hate. The red propagandists distort the facts concerning racial differences for ulterior motives. All the right is not on the Negro side. Neither is all wrong. The same holds true with regard to the white man's side. The repository of good and evil is not to be found in a particular race. Black men are just as good or as bad as white men. Yellow men are just as good as bad as brown or red. It'll behoove anyone to speak about the other. I absolutely agree, Mr. Johnson. Unfortunately, Manning had a car accident and died right after this was published, like a year or so later. So he couldn't be with us to write more and uncover more. But this is from, again, the 1950s. Guys, this subversion's been going on forever. I've covered this in other videos. If you don't understand this, go look at my other videos. It's what I talk about. Now, I talk about other stuff, but it's because I understand to some degree what is going on and what has been going on in our government and the realities, and not some stupid black or white issue, racial issue, Republicans good, Democrats bad, none of that. I'm not an ideologue, folks. I am a pragmatic individual. White men sold white men as slaves. That happened. Black men sold black men as slaves. That also happened. Black rulers are no more humane than yellow, red, or white. Yep. Neither are they less brutal. The placing of the repository of everything right and just among the darker races is a dastardly communist trick to use race as a means of grabbing and enslaving the whole of humanity. Moscow's Negro tools and the incitement of racial warfare place all the ills of the Negro at the door of the white leaders of America. Capitalism and imperialism are made symbols of oppression, white rules in keeping with instruction from the Kremlin. And then he goes over some points about feeling sorry for yourself, blaming others for your failure, ignoring countless opportunities around him, jealousy of progress in other racial and national groups, expect the white man to do everything for him, look for easy and quick solutions as a substitute for the harsh realities of competitive struggles and getting ahead. And again, you can look this up. This is online, folks. This book is online. But with that, I actually want to play some of this. Let's see. I think it's this video right here.
If white immigrants can come to this country 50 years ago with nickels and dimes and no education, and come here and pool their little nickels and dimes and no education, and set up little stores, develop these stores into larger stores, develop this into an industry which creates job opportunities for whites. Since Lincoln was supposed to have freed the black man 100 years ago, and today the black man, according to the government economists, has spending power of $20 billion per year. We feel that with the black man spending $20 billion a year, not setting up any businesses, not creating any industry, not creating any job opportunities for his own kind, he's not in a moral position to point the finger today at the white man and tell the white man that he's discriminating against him for not giving him a job in factories that he himself set up. If the black man has $20 billion, and these so-called Negro leaders are such geniuses that they can integrate white restaurants and integrate white factories and force themselves into that which the white man has set up, they should use this same ingenuity to show the black people how to pool our wealth and set up something of our own. And then we won't have to force our way into his anymore. One more thing I would like to point out concerning what he said about 125th Street. We don't waste our time on 125th Street, but you can reach more people in the street who want to change than you can in the bourgeoisie society, the bourgeoisie church, and the bourgeoisie circles. Our program is directed toward the man in the street. So we spend our time in the street, and what we do with that man, instead of trying to change the white man and your mind and make you accept us, we change the mind of the black man and make him accept himself. And as soon as he accepts himself, he'll solve his own problem. He won't be trying to force himself into your factory and into your bedroom and into your kitchen.
Now, there's more to that. 125th Street, I believe, there is a reference to Harlem, which was, a heavily dense black area at the time. It still is. I believe there's a lot more Hispanics there now. Here's another one from Malcolm X on the front page. Challenge, 1965, CBS Archives. I'm not going to play that just because I've gone really long tonight, guys. So just look, guys. If you really want to delve into the history of what's going on in the U.S., you have to understand all of it's on the side of the Democrats. And you people fall for it. You do. You know, maybe not you listening, because if you made it this far with me, you probably are open-minded or conservative leaning or libertarian or something. But there are many people out there who fall for this stuff. And they fall for it because, well, frankly, folks, they're gullible and they're led by their emotions. Their persona, they're not real developed individuals, and they don't care to think. And it's easier to have an ideological position and ideology possess you and feel like a moral person than to actually be one. And so, do I think the Republicans are perfect? No. But I know the history of the Republican Party is one of liberty. It's one of laissez-faire capitalism, small business, free markets. It's one of economic expansion and growth for all. It's one of tax cuts. Now, do corporations get some of that? Yeah, but that's also good business, man. They need tax cuts. They need those things, or they'll go elsewhere. Donald Trump's transforming the Republican Party. Now, I'll never join the Republican Party. I'll never join any party. But what I will say is that from the young people that I talk to when I'm in the DC area and I talk to these people that are in these political orgs, and from what I see, there is a new kind of Republican coming about. There is a new kind of conservative. There is that Rand Paul style of personality. And you can see it. You can see it with people like Matt Gaetz and others and who are out there. He has worked with my wife's organization many a times, which you would think would be a traditional liberal, progressive organization. Look, folks, it is not as black and white as, oh, everybody knows. I've had fools tell me this. Everybody knows the Democrats are for the poor working class and the Republicans are just for the corporations. No, that's never been the truth or the case. You've been lied to your entire life, and you've been a fool to believe it because, well, you don't read anything, you don't research anything, and you don't think. Now, let me say one last thing on that. I can give you some excuse for things back in the day because the media, the TV, the radio, the newspapers, the magazines, they controlled all of the flow of the information. You could get some books here and there. But today, anymore, information is too prevalent and the history abounds, and you can read it and you can see what went on. Quit thinking that FDR saved this country out of the New Deal. He destroyed the very fabric of American constitutionalism. And almost anybody who's a staunch constitutionalist starts reading history and going through it knows this. Before that, the bigger blow to it was the Civil War. And unfortunately, we're in the midst of a cold Civil War, which I hope goes away and doesn't escalate to being all-out battles in the street. And I mean, there are already skirmishes, but I mean gunfights and mass casualties and, people having to evacuate their homes and whatever else, because that has a potential to come. And all that has a potential to come mainly because of media manipulations and lies, because they are rich and they don't care. They literally do not care about you. If you think they care about you, you're a fool. You're truly foolish. Get your news, get your information, get your perspective from people that you think you can trust, people you think who are being honest and genuine with you. Go watch YouTubers. Go read articles. Figure out who's an honest person, who's not, who's consistent, who has principles. So like I said, I don't watch a lot of lefties, but someone like Jimmy Dore, I agree or disagree completely with his politics, but I know he's honest and truthful about the corruption. And that, my friends, is important. And don't be afraid to read other things. I read Jacobin on occasion, not because I believe in anything it has to say, but because I want to see the perspective. That's why. So, folks, with all that, if you want to watch a live show, Ends Justify the Memes over on DLive_Ends_Justify_memes. Replays over on YouTube, the Ends Justify the Memes. Again, this is a looser show, a little bit more humor, off the cuff, whatever else. I do have a subscribe star at AllMinucOne over there. And folks, if you like this, please hit that like button, share, subscribe, help me grow, make a comment. I'll comment back. Most likely. We'll see. But with all that said, folks, you all be well.